Hey everybody, that Montana guy bringing another video, and today we're going to talk about an in-depth informational video about the Tales of the Mountain Men, who it's for, who it's not for, a description of each chapter, because there are 17 stories of survival, exploration, and frontier spirit that are in this fantastic book. So if this is something you're interested in, stay tuned. Alright, so as I mentioned, this book gathers our nation's mountain men writings into one volume from Bernard DeVoto's book, Across the Marlin, Missouri, to A.B. Gathery Jr. book, The Big Sky. This book gives you 17 stories of survival, exploration, and frontier spirit. Before I kind of go into each chapter, I kind of want to tell you who this book is for and who it's not. Who it's for would be history buffs like me, armchair travelers like me, and historians, mountain men enthusiasts, and researchers. Because like I did say a little bit ago, it kind of gives you a broad spectrum of different novels that Mr. Underwood took and put into one volume. So with that said, we'll go ahead and get started. So the very first chapter, chapter 1, it's called A Much More Furious and Formidable Animal. In this chapter it talks about Lewis and Clark's expedition, and it came from the journals of Lewis and Clark. It's talking about their first encounter with the grizzly bear. And the nice thing about it is he just added things. For instance, he'll say Tuesday, May 14th, 1805, and then I'll give a description, and then they'll say Friday, June 14th, 1805. So he didn't really make his own story out of it. He just put the dates when they were talking about the grizzly bear. And then chapter 2, it's called The Mountain Man Wah, From Life in the Far West by George Frederick Ruxton. This was edited by Leroy R. Haffen. And in this chapter, it talks about George Frederick Ruxton's account of his experience with the trapping party. He was a British explorer and travel writer, hunter, and explorer who published papers and books about his travels to Africa, Canada, Mexico, and the United States. So that's what chapter 2 talks about. Chapter 3 talks about The Winter Lodge from Across the Wide Missouri by Bernard DeVoto. And again, if you're interested in these books, if I can find them on Amazon, I'll put a link in the description down below, as well as what each chapter covers. If you're just interested in knowing real quick instead of actually watching the entire video. The nice thing about chapter 3, The Winter Lodge, is that it is one of the most intimate portraits of the daily life of the mountain men that traveled from St. Louis over into the Rockies and over to the Pacific and in these areas. So it gives a great portrait of the daily life. And again, that's from Bernard DeVoto. So next one is called Chapter 4, Brown Skins and Beaver, Trappers on the Stream. It's from the book Carry the Wind by Terry C. Johnston. On this chapter, it focuses on Joseph Paddock and his mentor Titus Bass, called Old Scratch. Carry the Wind is a historical saga set in the Grand Tetons during a time when the nation was just being born. And it's a very great read, because it kind of puts you in perspective, again, of another mountain man's life, of what they encountered day to day. So it's a really good read. The next chapter is chapter 5, Wah-to-yah, a Mountain Man Tall Tale Classic. This is from Wah-to-yah and a Tales Trail by Lewis H. Garrard. And so it's a Tall Tale Classic taken from Lewis Garrard. And the mountain man talking in this chapter is John Hatcher, who is a hunter on the Santa Fe Teos Trail, who eventually, along with Kit Carson and 30 other men, drove sheep from New Mexico to California. Hatcher's conversation is recalled by young Lewis H. Garrard, who lived from 1829 to 1887. In his book on his 1846 to 1847 Western Travels, which was first published in 1850. And the next chapter, chapter 6, is Captured by the Blackfeet from Mountain Man by Vardis Fisher. Mountain Man is another great book. I do highly recommend that book also. I'll do a video on that informational book sometime in the future. And in chapter 6 of this book, it's the story of Sam Maynard, a giant of a man in both physical stature and character, while he encounters the dreaded Pied Nor, the Blackfeet mountain man, was one source of material for popular film Jeremiah Johnson, that was starring Robert Redford. So I thought that was actually kind of pretty interesting to know. Every time I hear about Jeremiah Johnson, the only thing I can think of is when he is in that mountain man's cabin, and the guy's like, if I catch it, you'll skin it and get it ready. And then all of a sudden you see the guy just running back into the cabin with the bear chasing behind him, and all of a sudden he jumps out the window. That's a pretty funny part of that book, or that movie. But yeah, this chapter does, like I said, it was one of the sources of material for the popular film, and it's a very good read. It talks about, being captured by the Blackfeet. So that said, we'll go on to the next one. So chapter 7 is called Bighorns in Wind River Range. This was taken from the adventures of Captain Bonneville, USA, in the Rocky Mountains of the Far West by Washington Irving. And so in this chapter, it talks about Captain Bonneville and 9 trappers who head to the Bighorn Mountains with the Green River and Wind River Range on beyond. It's a very interesting read. I can't say any bad things about any of these chapters, to be honest with you. It's a very good read. And so the next chapter is chapter 8, called Bufflers, again from the book The Big Sky by A.B. Guthrie Jr. In this chapter right here, he talks about Dick Summers, a veteran mountain man, leading a French expedition of fur traders into the northwest reaches of the Missouri River. In this book, there's many weeks of hard pulling from St. Louis on the expedition boat called the Mandan, which finally reaches Buffalo Country. And it's really interesting because it kind of talks about their journey, and then once this young gentleman sees the buffalo for the first time, it talks about his excitement, how excited he was to actually see a buffalo. So it's a very good read. So that's it. We'll go on to the next chapter here. So chapter 9 is a narrative of Mountain Man from the narrative of adventures of Zenas Leonard, written by himself. If you're not familiar, Zenas Leonard from 1809 to 1857 was a young Pennsylvanian whose mountain man adventures began in 1831 when he left St. Louis in a fur trading company of 70 men. And this kind of talks about his adventure of going out west. So it's again a very good read. Chapter 10 is The Legend of Broken Hand from the Mountain Men by George Laycock. So this book was published, The Mountain Men was published by Lyons Press in 1988 and republished in 96. And this chapter itself talks about the trapper Tom Fitzpatrick, also known to the Indians by two strange names. One of them was Broken Hand, and the other one was White Hair. This chapter just goes in depth of his journeys, of how he got those two nicknames. Chapter 11 is Across the Shining Mountains from the Long Rifle by Stuart Edward White. In this one, it talks about the young Andy Burnett and his adventure beginning with two older mountain men, companions, setting out for the Perry's Hole area, where they figure trapping small and quiet is a way to get beaver and keep their hair. Keeping their hair means not getting scalped. And it's a great read. Again, like I said, there's every single one of these chapters are well thought out by Mr. Underwood. They're all great picks, I believe. And they kind of give you a broad spectrum of some of the mountain men that were more famous. And then chapter 12 is Journal of a Trapper by Osborne and Russell. And in this chapter, it talks about him and his companions exploring the area that is Yellowstone Park. If you're not familiar with Yellowstone Park, it's a famous national park, first one ever made in the United States, down in Wyoming, and a little sliver of it is in Montana. Russell was born in 1814 in Maine and passed away in California in 1892, so he actually lived a pretty well life. He didn't die out in the woods like a lot of other mountain men did. So chapter 13 is called Trailblazer by The Mountain Men by George Laycock. And it talks about Captain Jedediah Strong Smith. This chapter talks about different things that happened throughout his life, all the way up to his death in 1831. So this kind of gives you a broad idea of who Captain Jedediah Strong Smith was. And it's a very good read, I believe. So moving on to chapter 14, Lord Grizzly, the Hugh Glass Ordeal, from the book Lord Grizzly by Frederick Manfred. In this chapter, it basically talks about Hugh Glass's experience with what he called in the book the she grizzly. It gives you an in-depth description of of that day that he got attacked, plus when he woke up after everybody left him for dead. And it kind of talks about his experience of how he felt, what was going on, and things like that. So, chapter 15 is a fur trader's narrative from the book 40 Years, a Fur Trader on the Upper Missouri, the personal narrative of Charles Larpenteur from 1833 to 1872. It's a personal narrative of Charles Larpenteur. It talks about Larpenteur's thoughts on Indian customs. Basically a subject every mountain man confronted in one way or another, because back in the fur trading era, the natives weren't on a reservation. They lived free, basically. And so this kind of talks about his interpretation of them. So Larpenteur was also an American fur trader whose memoir and diary frequently have been used as a source to fur trade history. He wrote a lot of, or in his diary gave you specific information, so a lot of historians love reading about his memoirs. Chapter 16 is on the Oregon Trail from the book Oregon Trail by Francis Parkman. It's basically talking about hunting buffalo. Francis Parkman was a historian and writer. The nice thing about this is that it actually talks about two different methods. Commonly practiced while hunting. They're called running and approaching. And so this kind of gives you a detail of the method of approaching and running buffalo. And it's actually a really, really great read. And then the final chapter is called Rendezvous and Farewell from the book The Big Sky by A. B. Guthrie Jr. This one talks about the Green River Rendezvous of 1837, which paints a vivid portrait of rendezvous time in the trapping community. It also describes about a trapper known as Dick Summers. It talks about him being at this rendezvous and it being his last rendezvous that he ever went to, and the reason why. Of 1837, it talks about of a gentleman that he didn't like this other gentleman didn't like a Blackfeet and they'll describe it in the book, but he didn't like Blackfeet, and Dick Summers was also with Boone Caudill, Jim Deakins, and their outcast Blackfoot Indian sidekick, Poor Devil. And so this kind of talks about an encounter that they had while at the rendezvous. And it's a very good read. Again, I can't say any bad things about this book. In the description, again, I'll put the description of each chapter, so if it's something you're interested in, you can take a look and see if it's something that you want to buy. I'll also put an affiliate link in the description of this book, as well as the other books that were described in this book, if you're wanting to check them out. Again, the people that this is for is basically history buffs, armchair travelers, historians, mountain men enthusiasts, and researchers. because it gives you a starting point of where your road wants to travel, so to speak. Like if you want to know specifically about Hugh Glass, well, it's in this book. If you want to know more about Smith, you know, it kind of gives you where to look. So, and it is a fantastic read. I do highly recommend it to add to anyone's library if they're, even if they're just wanting a book to read. It shows a lot of, or it tells a lot of great stories in there. So again, thank you all for watching, and I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, give it a thumb up. If you like more informational videos about books, consider subscribing. And I'm kind of curious, what other books do you have in your library about mountain men? Please put in the comments down below. And thank you all again for watching. Stay safe and enjoy the woods.